Om Shri Sai Ram. Invoking Bhagwan's presence amidst us and offering our collective pranams at the divine lotus feet of our most beloved Bhagwan, Sri Sathya Sai Baba Varu. Revered Chancellor Sir, respected Vice Chancellor Sir, distinguished speaker for the day, respected elders, dignitaries, faculty members, students, loving Sai Rams to each and every one of you that you have assembled here, and all those who have tuned in through online mode. We begin this afternoon's proceedings with invocatory Vedam chanting, followed by welcome address by Dean of Sciences, Professor Pallav Kumar Bharua. Sai Ram.
सरस्वत्यै नमः श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ओम् यश्छन्दसां वृषभो विश्वरूपः छन्दोभ्योऽध्यमृतात् सम्बभूव समेन्द्रो मेधया स्पृणोतु अमृतस्य देवधारणो भूयासम् शरीरं मे विचर्षणम् जिह्वा मे मधुमत्तमा कर्णाभ्यां भूरि विश्रुवम् ब्रह्मणः कोशोऽसि मेधया पिहितः श्रुतं मे गोपाय मेधा देवी जुषमाणा न आगात् विश्वाची भद्रा सुमनस्यमाना त्वया जुष्टानुदमाना दुरुक्तान् बृहद्वदेम विदते सुवीराः त्वया जुष्टऋषिर्भवति देवि त्वया ब्रह्मा गतश्रीरुतत्वया त्वया जुष्टश्चित्रं विन्दते वसुसानो जुषस्वद्रविणो न मेधे मेधां म इन्द्रो दधातु मेधां देवी सरस्वती मेधां मे अश्विना बुभावा धत्तां पुष्करस्रजा अप्सरासु च या मेधा गन्धर्वेषु च यन्मनः दैवी मेधा सरस्वती सामा मेधा सुरभिर्जुषधागुस्वाहा आमा मेधा सुरभिर्विश्वरूपा हिरण्यवर्णा जगति जगम्या ऊर्जस्वती पयसा पिन्वमाना सामा मेधा सुप्रतीका जुषन्ता मयि मेधां मयि प्रजां मयि अग्निस्तेजो दधातु मयि मेधां मयि प्रजां मयि इन्द्र इन्द्रियं दधातु मयि मेधां मयि प्रजां मयि सूर्यो भ्राजो दधातु हंस हंसाय विद्महे परमहंसाय धीमहि तन्नो हंसः प्रचोदयात् शांति शांति शांति।
Om Shri Sai Ram, offering our collective pranams at Bhagwan's lotus feet, I welcome all of you to this session, where we will dwell on an epidemic that entire humanity, and in particular, South Asia and India is facing. Talking about epidemic, I think recently we have gone through the pandemic and we feel that we are out of it. Amongst many scientific and technological intervention, we feel that every individual had certain responsibility to face it, be it maintaining 6 feet distance, wearing mask, logging onto Arogya Setu, etc., healthy habits, healthy food habits, so on and so forth. When humanity, the creation, faces a challenge, every individual will have to rise up to it. That is why a sloka from Rig Veda echoes, Atmano mokshartham jagat hitaya cha. It is the responsibility of every individual, while working for the emancipation of the individual self, it is responsibility to work for the greater good of humanity, in fact, the entire creation. Bhagwan, in one of his interactions with students of Sai Sannidhi, very lovingly talked about this responsibility, talked that seva is a birthright of every individual, and in the same interaction, now we know that Bhagavan modified, refined the daily prayer of Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu to Samasta Loka Sukhino Bhavantu. It shows the responsibility that is bestowed on every individual by our beloved Master himself. Talking about the research and the studies that has been conducted about diabetes mellitus, there are a number of groups studying, trying to understand the intricacies of disorder, and lot of advancement due to the fast growing science and technology space, be it molecular biology, be it omics study, or in the form of technology like IoT, machine learning, data analytics, and finally AI. We are here today that the communities have understood a lot of deeper intricacies about this disorder, this disease, and therefore they can talk about prevention, early detection, and also a better, refined, very efficient management of the disease. Talking about AI, IoT, and these technologies, we know already there are devices, there are methods, protocols, which is helping management of these kind of patients. Finally, to sum up the entire effort of communities, what we observe is that managing diabetes or getting out of this epidemic, it is not enough that only the scientific community or the doctors or physicians or clinicians, nor the patient and patient family, but effort needs to come from entire communities, social workers for creating awareness, NGOs, innovators, inventors, and finally, entrepreneurs. A lot of enterprises have sprung up in recent times to take care of diabetics and management. And this is an ample opportunity for each of us seated here to take home message, what is our role to control or to handle this epidemic. Individual effort finally counts, and there is a lot of scope for innovation and budding entrepreneurs. I welcome you all again to a very exciting session because the speaker we have today is a person who has spent more than a few decades in patient care and direct research of this disease. His credible performance is also noted when Government of India bestowed him with Padma Shri Award. If this is not enough, most importantly, I would say, his effort has been directly blessed by Bhagavan in multiple dimensions. If one goes through the books which he has authored, describing Bhagavan's blessings and miracles, it stands as testimony that today we are doubly blessed to listen to a speaker who is not only a person with his hard work and sincere work has established himself as a scientist and solution giver in this problem, but also he is an instrument in the divine hands. With these few words, I welcome our respected Chancellor, Sir K. Chakravarti Garu, our Vice Chancellor, Professor B. Raghavendra Prasad, our Speaker of the Day, Dr. Mohan, and our Registrar, Dr. Srikant Khanna. I stop here. Now, on behalf of the entire SSSIHL fraternity, I request our Vice Chancellor, Professor B. Raghavendra Prasad, to welcome the Speaker of the Day, Dr. Mohan, with a bouquet of flowers. Thank you, everyone. Fasten your seatbelt for a very exciting session. Sai Ram, thank you.
Now, I request Professor S. Venkatesh, Head Department of Biosciences, to come on to the stage and introduce the distinguished speaker. Professor Venkatesh.
It is a privilege and honor for me to introduce Dr. Mohan, who is associated with our department for quite a long period of time, over a decade. He has handheld us and has advised, mentored, and helped us to establish the Institutional Ethics Committee, which has helped us to take clinical research in a big way. Dr. Mohan has finished his MD, PhD, and DSc, following which he earned fellowship in many institutes of international repute, like the Fellow of Royal Society, Fellow of Third World Academy of Sciences, etc. He also has received honorary doctorates from institutes of international repute and universities of international repute. Dr. Mohan is the chairman of Diabetes Specialities Center at Chennai in South India, which is an IDF center of excellence in diabetes care. He has over 50 diabetes centers across 8 states and has over 665,000 registered diabetes patients in his electronic record. He is also the chairman of Madras Diabetes Research Foundation, which is an ICMR collaborating center of excellence and Asia's largest standalone diabetes research center. His main research interests are epidemiology of diabetes and its complications, genomics of diabetes, including monogenic diabetes, precision diabetes, and nutrition in diabetes. He has deep interest in research and has a record number of 1,835 publications, of which 1,127 are original articles. His research has attracted over 217,000 citations. He has an H index of 158 and an I-10 index of 959. One of his citations, one of his papers in circulation has attracted citations of over 66,000. Dr. Mohan has trained a large number of physicians and diabetologists, in addition to paramedics and educators. He has received over 200 awards, including the Harold Rifkin Award and the Dr. Kelly West Award by American Diabetes Association. He is the first Indian to receive these awards. He was awarded the Padma Shri by Government of India, the 4th highest civilian award in India. In 2017, Dr. Mohan is also the recipient of Bhagavan Sri Sathya Seva Baba Dhanvantari Seva Award by Sri Sathya Seva Organization in India. He has written 2 popular books on Swami. His first book, Sathya Sai Baba Lives On, is very popular and has been translated to 11 languages. His latest book on Swami is called Eternal Divine Grace. He is also among the top 2% of scientists ranked by in the world by Stanford University, and also is among the top 0.01% of researchers in type 2 diabetes by ExpertScape PubMed. Dr. Mohan owes all his success to Bhagavan Sri Sathya Sai Baba's grace and blessings, and considers his position as a member of Sri Sathya Seva Central Trust as the greatest honor he ever had received in his life. Bhagavan has given great importance to time management, and having followed Bhagavan's advice meticulously, excellence has become a habit for him, which also happens to be a title of his autobiography on making excellence a habit, the secret of building a world-class healthcare system in India, published by Penguin. Now I request Dr. Mohan to deliver his talk, Lessons Learned from the Epidemiology of Diabetes in Indians. Welcome, sir. Thank you.
Om Sri Sai Ram. At the outset, let us all offer a collective pranams at the divine lotus feet of our Lord and Master, Bhagavan Sri Sathya Sai Baba, who is everything to us, and but for him, there will be no meeting today, no university today, none of all that we see going on in this hallowed place would be there without Bhagavan. So Bhagavan, continue to bless us and guide us to continue the divine mission and the path that you have set for all of us. Thank you, Bhagavan. Om Sri Sai Ram. Next slide, please. I'd like to thank the Chancellor. It's a great honor to have Sri K. Chakravartikaru here in the audience, and I'm very grateful to Professor Raghavendra Prasad, Vice Chancellor, and Dr. Srikant Khanna, the Registrar, and all the faculty members for inviting me to be here today. That it's being done while the Adirudra Yagnam is going on, Mahayagnam is going on, is an even greater blessing and honor for me. So thank you all, and I hope I don't disappoint you all. Next slide. So the topic, actually, the Vice Chancellor, when he wrote to me, he said, why don't you base your talk on the Kelly West Award lecture, which I recently delivered about a few months ago in at the American Diabetic Association. So this is based on that, and one disclaimer I want to tell you is this is not a spiritual talk. This is a scientific talk. I thought it's going to be in the university, but when I realized it's going to be inside the ashram, I was feeling slightly guilty to give a completely scientific talk. But I'll tell you here and there a few things which Swami has actually guided me and blessed me in my work. Next slide. I have no conflict of interest. All the studies which I'm presenting here are government-funded studies, either from the Indian government agencies or from the UK or from the US. Next slide. So this is the Kelly West Award, and it was a pleasant coincidence and nothing short of Swami's grace and a miracle that this is actually the highest award in epidemiology in the world. And I'm the first Indian to receive it. But the coincidence is not that. 8 years exactly to the date, June 23rd, 6 years earlier, 2018, I received the Harold Rifkin Award, also at Orlando, also from the American Diabetic Association, from the same hall. So you can imagine what a coincidence that is. So when I received this, I immediately, of course, thank Swami for it, because but for him, this would never have happened. Next slide. Of all the awards of the American Diabetic Association, the Kelly West Award is published in their journal, and this was just published about 10 days ago. And I'd encourage you to read this because my whole talk is based on this. It's published in the latest issue of Diabetes Care, and this forms the basis of my talk. Next slide. So the story of epidemiology of diabetes starts in the 1970s. In fact, it was in 1972 when, as an 18-year-old, I joined my father, shown there at the, is that a pointer? So shown at the bottom, Professor M. Vishwanathan. Due to circumstances, he had to leave the Stanley Medical College, and he wanted me to take up medicine. And I took up medicine only because he wanted me to help him in his diabetes work. So I started working with him in 1972. Coincident when I joined Madras Medical College as a first-year MBBS student. Coincidentally, the very same year, the first epidemiological studies in India were published by Professor MMS Ahuja from the All India Institute of Medical Sciences and Professor O.P. Gupta from Ahmedabad. So at that time, that study was based on 6 cities which they had studied in India and 6 villages near those 6 cities. So the urban prevalence of diabetes was 2%, which means these are adults above 20 years of age. So if you studied 100 people in Delhi or Mumbai or Bangalore or Hyderabad or Chennai, 2 of them would have had diabetes. The same thing in rural areas was about half, so 1 to 1.5. Actually, it's around 1% of rural India which had diabetes. So at that time, my father made a statement which had a profound, where is it? Oh, it doesn't show, doesn't matter. So my father made a very profound statement which had a great impact on me. He said, diabetes in Indians is a migrant Indian phenomenon, which means if Indians here don't seem to have it, they seem to have the gene for it, but somehow when they migrate abroad, because it was in the 1970s, 60s and 70s that mass migration from India took place. Doctors, lawyers, they all went there. But wherever they went, it was very peculiar. Next slide, just press once. So whether you studied Canada, UK, Tanzania, South Africa, Mauritius, Singapore, Malaysia, Fiji, this is the prevalence of diabetes in Indians, mostly Indians. A few Pakistanis and Bangladeshis would have been there. That's why I use the word South Asian and Indian interchangeably. But if you look at the prevalence rates from 2%, 10%, 11%, 12%, not surprising, because when they go there, they're more affluent, they put on weight, they eat more, they exercise less, they buy a vehicle, and all the things associated with diabetogenesis occurred there. They're obviously more affluent compared to the very poor people in India at that time. So he used to say that it's a migrant Indian phenomenon. So when they go there, they get diabetes. Next slide. So the first lesson that we learned, that till around the year 2000, migrant Indians seem to have much higher prevalence of diabetes, and that's relevance to what I'm going to tell you, than Indians in India. Next slide. But then, something else very peculiar was noticed. It was not that the Indians had higher prevalence of diabetes compared to Indians in India. That you could easily explain. Obviously, they're more affluent, and they're walking less, and they have put on weight after going abroad. But if you compare the 6 studies shown here, done in different countries by different people, if you look at the prevalence of diabetes in South Asians, shown in the bracketed column there, and compare it across with any other ethnicity with which they had been compared, whether it's a white Europeans, whether it's a Chinese, Japanese, Melanesians, Malays, or Creole, any other population in any study which had been done, the Indians had the highest prevalence of diabetes. And now they're living in that country. And so if you say it's because of going to that country, then what happened to the people living there? What happened to all the ethnic groups of people living there? And the same thing, I'm sure Dr. Venkat Ram, who's in the audience, will agree with me, that with cardiovascular disease, the same thing was shown. At very young age, heart attacks were also coming. So cardiologists kept saying that South Asians get heart attacks, and we kept saying they have diabetes. Probably both are linked as well. So this was a puzzle, and we couldn't understand it because the Indians there were not more obese than any of those groups, and yet they seem to have higher prevalence. So something struck us, there's something about diabetes and South Asians which needs a lot of research, and this is why I started focusing on this. Next slide. So the second lesson that we learned, that South Asians, Indians have higher prevalence of diabetes than other ethnicities, including other Asians. So if you say it's all Asian, then what happened to the Chinese and Japanese who went there? Why are we having higher prevalence than them? It remained a mystery. Next slide. Meanwhile, things were happening in India. Up to the 1960s, I'm sure those of you who are older in the audience will remember, that India was dependent on its food from the food which came from the US through the PL 480 scheme. I remember the headlines in the newspapers. The ships have arrived from US, and therefore India has food for 2 more weeks until the next ship arrives. And then we have food for another 2 weeks. So we're living from ship to mouth kind of existence. Unless the ships came, we didn't have enough food. Somewhere around that time, M.S. Swaminathan, C. Subramaniam, and so on realized that this cannot go on for long. So we have to grow our own food. And that's how the Green Revolution came. So with the Green Revolution, we started getting more wheat and more rice in our country. And soon the country became self-sufficient in food. But then in 1991, something else happened. We were on the brink of bankruptcy. And it was the late Manmohan Singh, as finance minister, who decided that unless the country opened up and allowed foreign investment to come in, the country would go completely bankrupt. So that is a major change, two major changes. One is the Green Revolution, and the other one is 1991, when the country opened up. Now, once the country opened up, the economy grew. People started getting better jobs. They started earning better. They started buying vehicles. They could now eat 2 or 3 square meals a day. And the need for people to go abroad also slowly started going down. But the price we paid for that is obesity and diabetes. The very factors which made the migrant Indian get diabetes, now the native Indian also started getting the same problem. So obesity rates went up, and we see the graphs of how our economy grew. Diabetes and obesity parallels that. Next slide. So you can see that over the years, this is a table which is useful and yet not so useful. It's useful in the sense that if you draw the line at 1991, it's very clear that until then, diabetes prevalence was in single digits, 2%, 4%, 5%, and so on. After 1991, all studies are in double figures, 10%, 12%, 14, 18, 19. The last kind of a study we did, I'll tell you about another study we did, the whole India study. But before that, we were only doing cities. So the latest study done about 10 years ago shows that in Delhi and Chennai, if you study 100 people, I'm not talking about rich people, I'm not talking about poor people, I'm talking about representative population of Chennai and Delhi, which means you just stand on the road and pick 100 people, 25 of them already have diabetes. So it's a 10-fold increase from what we had noted earlier. Now you may say, well, 75% still don't have diabetes, no? I'm talking about 20 years of age. In the same study, when we looked at 50 years of age, 45 to 50% of everyone who lives in Chennai and Delhi have diabetes, and another 25 to 30% have pre-diabetes. If you add the two together, it's 75 to 80% of all people of 50 years and above in Delhi and Chennai who have either diabetes or pre-diabetes. Now, you're not able to find normal people. If you need controls who have absolutely normal glucose tolerance, you have to search hard above the age of 50 or 60 years. So at this stage, I thought, shouldn't I revisit that hypothesis which my father said, that it's a migrant Indian phenomenon? We're having so much of diabetes here. Now is the time to compare again and see what happened with the migrant Indians. Next slide. So we did the study where we did an exact comparison using exact methods with the Masala study done in the US. The Masala study has 2 large populations of Indians, one in the Bay Area in California, and the other in northern Chicago. So in these 2 places, we have Alka Kanaya and Kandula Namrata, the 2 who are also co-authors on this. So they said, we'll compare our Indians here in US with the Indians living in Chennai. Surprise, surprise, the red is the Indians in Chennai. So we now have higher rates of diabetes than the migrant Indian or the migrant South Asian. So the clock has now gone a complete circle from what my father used to say, and we have more diabetes now in India. Are we surprised by this? I'm not surprised, because the people who have gone abroad are of a different socioeconomic status. They're very well educated, they're conscious about their health, they've started eating the right food, they've started exercising, they're worried about their weight, they're worried about their health, they have better access to health care, and therefore they're a much healthier lot than the common man who lives in India, who has still not yet come to that level. So I was not surprised at all when these results came. Next slide. So this is the lesson number 3, that in 40 years the clock has come a full circle, and now we have more diabetes in India than the Indians living abroad. Next slide. Meanwhile, my daughter arrived on the scene, and she was very critical. She said, what are all these studies you're doing? You're doing all some Chennai study, one Delhi study, something, and then you're calling it India. That's not India, Papa, she said. I said, what is India then? He said, India is India. You have to study the whole country. I said, I'm a clinician. How do you think I can study the whole country, a country as diverse as India? She said, I'll do it. If you get me the funding, I'll do it. So I went to ICMR and talked to the Director General and said, my daughter has this crazy idea that she wants to study the whole country, all the 31 states, get a representative sample, and such a study has never been done in the world. So he said, it's a great idea, ask her to do it. We'll fund it. So that started the so-called ICMR INDIAB study. It's actually now 124,000 people, representative of India's 1.44 billion people. So if you take the census of India, any parameter you take, and you take INDIAB, they'll sit on each other. It's exactly a representative study. It took us 12 years to complete, but finally I'm happy to tell you that every state in the country has been sampled, including every island in the country. We've just finished Andaman, Nicobar, Daman, Diu, Lakshadweep, everything over. And this is the largest epidemiological study ever done in the world. Nobody had attempted a study like that. Next slide. That's my daughter, and several papers, most of it are in Lancet Diabetes, and so on. But this is a master paper, and this got published in June 2023, and this kind of shook the whole government, because the numbers which we had thought for India were actually disproved when this study was published. It was much more. The numbers were much more. Next slide. So we have 101 million people with diabetes in India. And if that's not enough, 136 million people with pre-diabetes. Now, if you add those two, 237 million people, there are not too many countries in the world which have 237 million people. So if the number of people with diabetes and pre-diabetes in India was a country, it'll be the 5th largest country in the world. That's the number of people that we have. If that was not enough, look at the number of hypertension, which Dr. Venkatram will be interested to know. 315 million people, almost the population of the United States, and even more with abdominal obesity. So we have a huge problem of non-communicable diseases in this country. It's not just diabetes, but all the non-communicable diseases. Next slide. There is also huge variation. I'm not going to go into that. The reason my daughter wanted to study that, because she was saying Chennai and Delhi may be the tip of the iceberg, and you may be missing everything else. She's quite right, because the prevalence of diabetes in Bihar, for example, or UP, is 4%, whereas in Kerala, Goa, and Puducherry, it is 26% of the whole state, not Trivandrum or Calicut or Kochi, the whole state, if you take, 26%, 1 in 4 of people living in Kerala have diabetes, whereas it's 4% in UP, luckily, because UP itself is 200 million. So if that becomes 5% in UP, you can imagine how much it will go up. But now we have got the entire status of the whole country. Now, I referred to the fact that Indians had higher prevalence rate than Chinese, Japanese, and others. So this raised the concept, and I introduced the concept of what is called as the Asian Indian phenotype. I said there must be some phenotype, it could be genotype also, which makes us more prone. Next slide. This has been studied by many people. It's not just our group, but many other groups all over the world. And I can tell you there are at least 12 differences from the type 2 diabetes, the commonest form of diabetes that we see in Indians, compared to the Western world. To start with, we get it at a lower age. And then there is an initial stage of insulin secretion, which is higher. Rapidly, the insulin goes down. We develop severe diabetes. We also develop abdominal obesity, and I'll very briefly talk about that. Next slide. The first piece of work was when I was working in the UK. I was randomly going through the insulin levels of Indians who had undergone GTT there, glucose tolerance test there, and the white population. And it suddenly struck me that the Indians are having higher insulin levels. So when I made this observation, I went to my boss, and I said, this seems to be something funny. The same lab, same Indians, you match them for weight, match them for BMI, match them for gender, match them for everything. Indians are having higher insulin levels. She said, let's present it. So when I presented it, Bob Turner, who is the architect of the UKpedia study, he came for my presentation, and he said, either you're terribly right or terribly wrong. Either way, you have to know what it is. If you're terribly right, you're on to a big discovery. If you're terribly wrong, better get rid of it fast. Because I don't know of an ethnic difference in insulin secretion. Why should Indians secrete more insulin? So he said, so we published this, showing the red is the insulin. These are normal people. The control is non-diabetic people. They're all having normal glucose tolerance. But the Indian has to put out so much more insulin to maintain normal glucose tolerance. And even in the first stages of diabetes, they have a little hyperinsulinemia. So Bob Turner told me, if that is true, do glucose clamp studies. There you're measuring insulin resistance. Then you can show whether Indians are more insulin resistant. Next slide. So we did glucose clamp studies. We matched the Europeans and the Indians for weight, for age, for gender, for everything. They're very complicated. It takes 8 to 10 hours to do one clamp studies. And so when we did that, we proved for the first time in the world that Indians are more insulin resistant. It has never been shown that racially, ethnically, there can be differences in insulin resistance. Subsequently, 12 groups have confirmed. There's almost 20, 25 publications subsequently confirming these findings. Next slide. All this is due to more fat inside the abdomen. This is becoming clear. When you do fat studies, you do ultrasound, you do CT scan, you do visceral scan, it's very clear that the white person, if they have fat, it seems to be in the abdominal wall, whereas we seem to have directly going into the abdomen, and then it settles in the liver. So this argument went on for some time. Is it visceral or subcutaneous, or is it liver? A meta-analysis showed of all the studies, showed that it is visceral inside, but that visceral doesn't stay floating around in the stomach. It gets into the liver. And that's why we have so much of fatty liver. You must be hearing of fatty liver all the time. And we seem to have much more of fatty liver than the Western world. Next slide. So the lesson 4 that we learned is that Indians have higher insulin resistance. Very rapidly, the insulin goes down. And this is driven by ectopic liver fat. Because liver is the place where the insulin is supposed to work. And there, if you have a lot of fat, the insulin cannot work. And therefore, your fasting glucose goes up. And that's what happens. Next slide. There was a beautiful study, which I must mention. This actually came after I delivered the Kelly West lecture, but I took the permission of the editor to include this in my article, because this is a breakthrough study. What they did in this is from Glasgow. What they did was, they invited Indians and white Europeans and said, we're going to overfeed you. Okay? We want to see what happens to your fat and why the Indians are different. So they were volunteers. They purposely overfed them the same diet to the Indians and the white people. Both gained weight. But the Europeans gained fat and muscle, whereas the Indians didn't gain muscle. They were only gaining fat, and they were gaining only the visceral fat, which is quickly going into the liver. Okay? They were able to show that. So then, next slide, they tried to see what exactly was happening there. They did biopsies. They did biopsy of the abdominal wall. They found that the number of small adipocytes, which can fill up and become big in the subcutaneous tissue, was reduced in the Indians, whereas the white people had a lot of it. So when they eat, all their fat goes into the abdominal wall. It doesn't go inside, so it doesn't do any harm. It's like wearing an extra coat. That's it. Nothing happens to you. Whereas the Indians, genetically, they seem to have very small number of those cells. So fat overflow. Quickly it fills that subcutaneous tissue, goes into the visceral, and then goes into the liver. So we are able to now demonstrate why the Indians are developing the insulin resistance, why they are having this Asian Indian phenotype. This is a breakthrough paper which is able to actually show that. Next slide. Meanwhile, we wanted to also study the insulin secretion. If you have a lot of insulin, we showed in the first slide you saw the normal glucose tolerance. They're putting out a lot of insulin, but they didn't get diabetes. To get diabetes, your beta cell has to fail. Your pancreas has to fail. So we did a large cross-sectional study looking at normal glucose tolerance people. The yellow one is the insulin secretion. The other one is insulin resistance. This is 26,000 people in Chennai whom we studied with normal glucose tolerance, 2 pre-diabetes, impaired fasting glucose, impaired glucose tolerance, combined. So up to IFG plus IGT is pre-diabetes, okay? And then newly detected diabetes. When we went to the homes and tested them, we found that they had diabetes. You can see how quickly the insulin level is dropping. By the time they come to pre-diabetes, already 50% of the beta cell function is gone. By the time they develop diabetes, 80% of the beta cell function is gone. This rapid loss of beta cell function is not seen in the white Europeans. They take a long time. That's why they develop diabetes in their 50, 60. We get it in 20 and 30 because the beta cell is very rapidly falling. So that caught the next attention and said we should find out why we are losing this beta cell function. Next slide. So Indians have severe insulin deficiency. Next slide. So the next thing comes, is this all genetic? When you're born itself, you have all this due to genes, or is it due to environment? The easy thing to go after was genes, because all you have to do is to do proper genetic studies. Of course, you have to do genome-wide association studies, which are difficult to do. Now we are doing whole genome sequencing. But it's an easier thing to do than to study the environmental factors. So therefore, we first looked at genetics. Next slide. So several Jiva studies were published, some in Nature Genetics, some in other journals. While we are able to find, this works. I think it's too bright, the thing. Screen is too bright. Doesn't matter. So we were able to cut a long story short. Yes, there were a few. For example, those 6 genes that we've discovered there were novel genes. First time discovered, only associated with diabetes in Indians, not in Chinese, not in Japanese, not in white Europeans, not in any other race. So he'll say, you solved the problem. No, we didn't solve the problem because they're so small. The effect size of those genes are so small, it cannot explain why Indians are getting diabetes. You put it all together, 5%, you can explain. So in other words, genes really didn't help us to solve the problem as to why we are getting this diabetes so much. Next slide. This is a more recent study where we, in collaboration with the Queen Mary College in London, where we are able to actually identify that the blue is the white Europeans and the pink is the Asians. If you study the genes for beta cell function, they are different in the Indians and in the Europeans. So we are able to explain why we are losing beta cell function and why we are getting it at a younger age. And we are now following it up with another paper which is being written now. Next slide. But the big thing is not the genes, it is the environment. Next slide. That's very obvious, isn't it? When I'm telling you that when we had more food, and in 1991, when India opened up its economy, suddenly diabetes went up. All our genes didn't change in 1991. What changed was the environment. We had more food, and from the type of life that we lived there, people carrying weights on their head, agricultural work, now they only carry cell phones on their head. Children used to play in the fields. Today, who plays in the field? They're all playing computer games. So the lifestyle has completely changed. And you can see when they work to American timings, they're all working in call centers and ordering in all the high-calorie food, which is very rich in carbs, less physical activity, and I'll come to the pollution last. Next slide. What is the evidence that taking more carbohydrate produces diabetes? The first was a cross-section study that we did. Next slide. Where we showed that whether it's carbohydrate itself, this is in Chennai. Everybody eats carbohydrate here, okay? But now we have divided that into 4 quartiles. Those who take the least, quartile 1. Those who take maximum, quartile 4. And you can see it's carbohydrate, glycemic load, glycemic index, whichever goes up, your diabetes is going up. So even within a carb nation, where everybody is eating carbs, if you take 200 grams of carbs as compared to 400 grams of carbs, your diabetes goes up 4 times. Okay? And if you take more fiber, it goes down. So the right messages seem to come. But the criticism is this is a cross-sectional study. It's not very good. You'll have to do a long-term, longitudinal study of people who did not have diabetes, then they ate, and then they developed. It's very difficult to do, but we did it. Next slide. That is called the PURE study. The PURE study, I'm sure Dr. Venkatram and others know about this, is originated in India. And now from Dr. Salim Yusuf, who's in McMaster University in Toronto, in Canada, currently it has 250,000 people from 27 countries. It's the largest epidemiological study ever done in the world, in anything. And 27 countries, 5 continents are involved in it, but it started in India. It started in Bangalore, Chennai, Trivandrum, and 2 other cities. So in this study, we had longitudinal data, 20 years, same people we followed for 20 years. So we followed these people and said, let's look at the rice intake. Next slide. So if you look at the rice intake, it's very high in South Asia. Look at the rice in other parts of the world, virtually nothing. Here we have very high rice intake. And these are people who did not have diabetes when we started the study, and then developed diabetes after 10, 15 years, and we tried to correlate it with the rice intake. Next slide. And what we find that in South Asia, the hazards ratio is 1.61. What does it mean? There's a 61% increase in type 2 diabetes risk in South Asia because of the higher rice intake which is taken. Whereas in other countries, it is less. China, incidentally, you may say in China also they eat rice. No, they've started reducing their rice intake. China takes half the rice. They've started switching over to more protein, soy, and other things, and they've cut down their rice intake, and therefore, their risk has come down. Next slide. What about physical activity? If you take rice, but you do physical activity, does it help? Of course it helps, because from the hazard ratio of 1.5, it comes to 1.16. There's a 34% reduction in the risk, and now the statistical significance is gone. So by doing enough exercise, maybe if you take enough rice, you can offset it. But the important thing is to reduce your rice intake. Next slide. So this is what we showed, that there's a strong correlation between rice intake and diabetes. Next slide. Now, it's very easy to tell all Indians now, stop eating rice, stop eating thing. That's not going to work. Nobody's going to do that. It's not sustainable. So we went back to India, and then we got a mathematician involved. His name is Seshadri Srinivasan. So we got him in and said, let's look at all the data and use AI and all the other tools which I mentioned. How much carbohydrate do we have to reduce, and what should we replace it with? Turned out to be a very simple formula. Next slide. If you reduce the carbohydrate from the 60 to 70% to about 50%, which means a 10% reduction in your carbohydrate, and replace it with good quality plant protein, Bengal gram, green gram, black gram, and so on. We believe that you can actually prevent diabetes, and in those with early diabetes, you can actually reverse the diabetes. We're doing some studies in that. So to you, simple, what do? When you take your plate, your thali, don't fill it with first rice and second sambar sadam, then again rasam sadam, and then again curd rice, and then something else. Don't take it like that. Fill half your plate with vegetables. Keep quarter of your plate for protein, preferably vegetable protein, and then you take less of the carbohydrate. Incidentally, I told you that I'll tell you one secret which Swami taught me. This rice, whole work on rice is entirely due to Swami. In an interview, he asked me many years ago, Doctor, why is diabetes increasing in India? And I tried to tell him genetics. Then he asked me, did the genes change in the last 30, 40 years? I said, no, Swami. Then I said, physical activity, Swami, nobody is exercising. He said, partly true, it's due to white rice. And you have the data with you. Actually, we had collected data, I had not looked at it. And he said, go and look at your data. In your data, it is there, showing that rice is linked. That is how all these papers came. From here itself, I called my team. As soon as the interview was over, from here itself, I called my team and said, take out all the thing on rice and let's have a look at it. That's how these years of work came. So Swami has a direct connection to my work, and I used to even... I even used to say that Swami should be the first author of this paper, because it's him, it's his idea. He is the one who gave us this idea. Next slide. Now, that one slide I just wanted to tell you, why are the cities still having more diabetes than the rural areas? Of course, we have more obesity, we are better off, and so on. But there are newer risk factors which are emerging. One such is pollution, which we showed a couple of years ago, last year, I think. And this is coming up in a very big way, especially in Delhi and some other cities where there's a lot of pollution. New onset diabetes just linked to pollution. That pollution goes and damages your pancreas. It goes and sits in your liver. It produces inflammation. It produces all kinds of things, produces insulin resistance. So pollution is an easily controllable factor. If only we're able to reduce the pollution in our cities, I'm sure we'll find diabetes and obesity going down. And that's the new area of research which we're working on. Next slide. So the lessons that will just go on, just tap, 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 is that there is a genetic susceptibility, but then we start overeating, we develop a lot of fat, the fat overflow hypothesis, insulin resistance compounded by air pollution leads to diabetes. The solutions are that from childhood itself, you start reducing your carbs, start exercising, reduce pollution, and we believe that we can prevent diabetes. Now I just want to switch tracks, next slide, and show you something else which is very exciting, because this is something which comes more in the seva part of an application of diabetes in day-to-day life. So I want to talk about this precision medicine. Next slide. So what is precision medicine? Precision medicine, all the tools which were mentioned, your AI and machine learning and all that, you use whatever you want, and then you say, this diabetes can be controlled by this tablet or this injection or whatever. That is precision medicine. But the patient tells you, I don't want it. Then what do? You have to go down to the patient's level and take the source, or the patient cannot afford it. Then what do? So that is where the personalized medicine comes in. So that's the difference between precision and personalized medicine. Next slide. So we have been working a lot on, you can skip next slide. We have been working a lot on this precision diabetes. Next slide. I'll talk about type 2 diabetes to just tell you that all type 2 diabetes is not the same, but I want to spend a little more time on the neonatal diabetes part. Next slide. A few years ago, 2018, there's a group from Sweden which said that not all type 2 diabetes is the same. Some have more insulin resistance, some have more insulin secretory defect, and so on. Somehow, there, because of the 12 differences that we have with Indian diabetes, we were not totally aligned to this publication. So we said we should look at it ourselves. Next slide. So, next slide. So, in collaboration with the University of Dundee, next slide, we described 4 subtypes of diabetes in India. 2 of them were totally novel. Next slide. I'll just show you one slide. So on one end, you have young people who are thin, who are severely insulin deficient, and we call that as SID, severely insulin deficient. On the other hand, because of the rising obesity, you have very obese people coming in. They're totally insulin resistant. They don't have much of deficiency. We described for the first time a combined variety, which is CIRDD, combined insulin resistance. And then there is a age-related. As you grow older, after 60, 70, almost everyone will have a slight raise of their sugar. That's the easiest to control. You really don't have to worry about it. It won't develop any. So all type 2 diabetes is not the same. That's a message that I want to leave you with. Next slide. Next slide. You can skip these. You can skip these. Just to show that some people, see, you may wonder, some people develop kidney complications, others don't develop kidney complication. Today, using AI and using advanced learning techniques, we're able to predict who will get kidney disease, who will get eye complications, and so on. Next slide. Next slide. Skip the next one also. Next slide. I want to talk about these 2 types of diabetes. So far, we have talked about type 2 diabetes. There is one more type which you should know I'm not talking about, that's type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes occurs in children. These children, once they are diagnosed to have type 1 diabetes, they don't have a drop of insulin in their body. They have to take 4 injections of insulin throughout their life, and if they stop the insulin, they'll die. As simple as that. So it's a big challenge, because in villages and so on, in Puttaparthi itself, we have many children with type 1 diabetes, whom I've also been trying to help. But these are very unfortunate because they have to, even with the 4 injections a day, the sugars keep going up and down. But the problem is that not all these children who are diagnosed to have type 1 diabetes actually have type 1 diabetes. They can have other forms of diabetes, like monogenic diabetes. And this can only be found out if you do genetic testing. And if you do this genetic testing, you can take these children off insulin and they can be treated with tablets. So I'll talk about those 2. First, let's consider MODY, or maturity onset diabetes of the young, was described by a man called Stephen Fayance. He's called the father of MODY. And I have the great honor that in June, I'm delivering the Stephen Fayance lecture at the University of Michigan. It's always been my dream to go there to his department. And in this June, I'm delivering this lecture. But he's the one who described all these subtypes of diabetes. The advantage of knowing all this, each one has a genetic defect. And if you're able to find the defect, you can say whether they'll develop complications, whether it's treated with tablets, or they need insulin. All that is possible today, and we do it routinely in our lab now. Next slide. And we have been publishing on MODY 3, MODY 1, next slide, MODY 2, MODY 5, and so on. Next slide. Next slide. How to identify these patients? Because not all the MODYs also, it's MODY incidentally, not MODI. How do we identify these MODY patients who respond to tablets. In other words, what we call as actionable MODI. Next slide. Next slide. So we identified people who had MODI, those who had type 1 diabetes, and then who had type 2 diabetes. This is not known in the world, so we had to do a very extensive study. Next slide. And we looked at various factors, age, their weight, and so on. Turned out that a very simple test called C-peptide, which is a measure of how much insulin you secrete in the body. And if you look at the last one, the fasting C-peptide and the stimulated C-peptide, the blue is the type 1. They have virtually no insulin, zero, and that's why they are dependent on insulin. The type 2s, because they're obese, the green one, they have quite a bit of insulin secretion compared to the type 1s. But the MODI is in between. So if you have the simple test which you can do, it's only 300 rupees. You can do it free of cost also if needed. And by the simple test, we're able to identify who will have MODI and who can be taken off insulin and prevent lifelong insulin treatment, which will come out better in my next presentation. Next slide. Next slide. Now I want to end with a fascinating type of diabetes, which all of you should know. And this is called neonatal diabetes. This is the last part of my talk. Neonatal diabetes, next slide, is a type of diabetes which occurs in newborn children, 6 months of age. Okay? Newborn, can be 1 day, 2 days. By 6 months, that type of diabetes disappears. So if any child you know of, why I'm saying this, because some of you might have heard of such a child who was immediately after birth detected to have diabetes. Almost always, that child will not have type 1 diabetes, but will have neonatal diabetes. And if they have neonatal diabetes, the child does not need to take insulin at all. Okay? Next slide. I can illustrate this with this child. This is Ivana Das. So when she was 3 months old, she came to us. She was diagnosed when she was 2 weeks of age. Then when she was 3 months old, the physicians in Calcutta were struggling to control her diabetes. She was taking 4 injections a day. The small girl, newborn girl, was taking 4 injections a day. Sugar's not coming down. So somebody from Calcutta said, there's a center in Chennai. You can go there. Maybe they will help you to find some other type of diabetes. So she came. Next slide. We have an algorithm that any child below 6 months of age will do a genetic test. And with the genetic test only, we then prescribe what to do. So we did the genetic test for her. Next slide. And correctly, she had this particular mutation. There are 2 mutations which respond to tablets, KCNJ11 and ABCC8. If one of these 2 comes, the child can be taken off insulin. This child had KCNJ11 mutation. Next slide. So what happened was, we started her on a tablet. Now, glibentamide, some of you may know, is the cheapest anti-diabetic drug you can ever get. Much, much cheaper than insulin. So we started her on that. Next slide. And you can see, just press 1, 2, 3. Yes. So slowly we increase the dose of the sulfonyl, keep it there. So the green is the sulfonylurea dose, the glibentamide. We slowly increased it. The red is the insulin. Insulin dose came down. By the 4th day after she entered our hospital, she was off insulin. The blue is the blood sugar. You can see that it is possible to withdraw insulin. Next slide. So that is Ivana Das when she came in 2014. In 2023, she came back. She's now 9 years old. From the day she left our hospital till now, she has not had 1 single shot of insulin. More than that, her sugars are absolutely under control. Her HbA1c is 5.6 with this half tablet. She doesn't do any testing also. She says it's so well controlled, I don't even have to test it. It's almost like a cure. And here is this girl who was taking 4 injections of insulin per day because somebody has diagnosed her to have type 1 diabetes. So this is the power of precision medicine. This is the power of doing genetic testing and so on when it is needed. Next slide. I'll show you the exact benefit that Ivana got. If genetic testing was not done, if she had not come to us, she would have taken up to last year, 1 more year has passed now, 13,140 times she would have injected herself. This girl, okay? The cost of the cheapest insulin that you can get in India would have been 1,75,000 over 9-year period. Cost of glucose monitoring, you cannot do insulin 4 times a day and not test your glucose. So she'd have spent 2.58 lakhs. The income of her father is 20,000 rupees. So there's no way she would have had this. All this we would have had to give, and still she wouldn't have gotten the control. Since we did the genetic testing, insulin stopped, 13,000 injections avoided. The neonatal diabetes testing cost abroad is 1 lakh. The cost in our lab is 2,000, but we have not charged a single patient, single child in India till today. We have done it completely free of cost. So, of course, Ivana Das didn't pay for her testing. Neither did she pay for her treatment for the 9 years. Okay? This is Swami's influence, that we have to do something to help people. So that is, again, guidance from Swami. And the family has been completely saved. This child's life has been completely transformed. Next slide. So with this, we set up the Monogenic Diabetes Registry of India. Next slide. And today, from every medical college in the world, in India, we get samples. The moment a child is diagnosed, they send a sample. Within 2 weeks, we give the results. And if the child has either the KCNJ11 or the ABCC8, the child doesn't have to come. Just send the blood sample. We do it completely free of cost. And then we help the child to go off insulin. How many children have we helped? Next slide. About 2,200 people have been referred, of which 400 are neonatal diabetes, 159 are neonatal diabetes plus something. They have little liver involvement or something. The last is the opposite. CHI is congenital hypoglycemia of infancy. The exact opposite of neonatal diabetes. Same genes, same KCNJ and same ABCC8. But instead of the gain of function mutation, they have a loss of function mutation. So the child is born with hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia, blood sugar will be 10, 20, the child goes into fits and usually the child will die. Usually what they used to do was they send the child for pancreatectomy. They remove about 90% of the pancreas so that the child can live. Today, by doing genetic testing, we can find out which mutation is there. There are tablets to which they can respond, diazoxide or octreotide, and each mutation responds to a particular variety of tablets. These tablets are also given free of cost by us, and therefore, children are referred from all over the country, and then we find out the defect, we tell them what they will respond to, and give them the medicine also for that. So the thing is that we have only got about 400, 500 children with this. I think that there must be at least 10,000 children in India with this. What is happening to the rest of the children? In my lifetime, I want to see that every child with neonatal diabetes or congenital hypoglycemia in India is detected, and we are able to give them the right treatment. Next slide. So to conclude, precision diabetes is now becoming a reality. With respect to type 2 diabetes, we have 4 clusters. Study of monogenic diabetes, either if you detect MODY or neonatal diabetes, they can go off insulin. It is completely life-changing, and it's nothing short of a miracle. In fact, it's the greatest satisfaction that as a diabetologist I get. When somebody is wrongly diagnosed to have a condition and told to take 4 times insulin, we take them completely off insulin. Next slide. So I wish to thank all my collaborators. Next slide. A large team from our own center who do all the work. Next slide. And these are my contact details in case we want to do. Next one is my WhatsApp channel. If you all want to get more information about diabetes, you can just scan this thing, and it's also there in other ways you can get it. And every day you'll get one message from me. One positive message will be 365 days. I assure you, I'll give you one message. And almost every other day, one new scientific fact which you can use in your career or you can tell to somebody else will be there. Next slide. I'd like to end by thanking Swami. Om Jai Sai Ram. There are time for questions. I'd be happy to take a few questions.
Now we'll open the house for questions and answers. Over to the audience.
Yes, sir. Yes? Monjaro, yeah.
Sorry. Can you speak to the effects of Monjaro? And I'm also taking insulin as well. She said that with Monjaro and Sinjardi, I could possibly get rid of the insulin.
Yeah. So we don't have Monjaro as yet in India, but next month it is expected to come. Both Wegovy and Ozempic we don't have, but we have the tablet version. It's called Rybelsus. And the reason it didn't come to India is because these drugs are so popular abroad that they get sold out there, and they're just not able to bring it to India. But Monjaro, the Lilly director, CEO, has said that by next month we will introduce it in India. These are game-changing drugs. There is no doubt about it. The amount of weight loss that you get with either Wegovy or with Monjaro is something unbelievable. People lose 10, 15, 20 kilograms in weight, which only with bariatric surgery we could get earlier. All the earlier weight-losing drugs had side effects, and they had to be withdrawn or banned. These two drugs have become, they made their companies trillion-dollar drugs. The good news is that they won't be affordable in India because they're very expensive. But the good news is that semaglutide, Wegovy, the first one, Ozempic, it's going off patent. And so by next year, March, 10 Indian companies are already ready to bring it at 1/10 of the cost. So that will come. So it will become affordable even in India. Monjaro does have a patent for some more time. Monjaro is even better than Ozempic and Wegovy, at least for people who can afford. Otherwise, we'll have to find some way to use it. Now, these are mainly for obese people. The thin variety which I talked about, the mild age-related variety I talked about, it doesn't help. It doesn't help neonatal diabetes. It doesn't help type 1 diabetes. So it is only for type 2 diabetic people who have obesity and they want to lose weight. Insulin resistance is cut by this. But having said that, they are fantastic drugs. Very soon, they will become affordable when more and more companies make it. So I know that in the US, US and many other countries, they are runaway success. So one can't argue with success, as they say.
Well, thank you. And unfortunately, I forgot it when I came, so I'll try it when I get back. Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Mohan with greetings, Sairam.
Sairam.
With Monjaro, the objective of dose adjustment is the weight or glycated hemoglobin?
Both. So they are also approved for weight loss, pure weight loss in people without diabetes. For example, Wegovy is for weight loss alone. It's the same drug in a higher concentration. Ozempic is for diabetes and weight loss. It's the same drug. So it's approved for just weight loss, people without diabetes. And of course, if you have diabetes and obesity, then it's a drug of choice. Yeah.
Sairam, sir. Sir, can you explain a little more about the CHI variety, sir? When you spoke about the neonatal diabetes, CHI, you are saying that tablets can control it. So do they suppress the genes, or is there a modification that happens?
So they have on the pancreatic beta cell, there is a potassium channel. That potassium channel has to close, and then the calcium channel has to open. The calcium, once the calcium enters, it releases the insulin. That's how insulin secretion occurs. When you have a genetic defect there, in that beta cell, there is genetic defect. When you have the genetic defect, this whole mechanism is paralyzed. So the potassium channel doesn't close, the calcium channel doesn't open, so calcium cannot come in, so there's no insulin secretion, and they have diabetes. When you give these, the genetic defect is on that, and the drugs go and work on the receptor of that beta cell and reactivates it. So it's almost like a cure of that particular condition. The defect which is there is opened up by giving this. By giving insulin, you're only bypassing the system. Insulin will be needed for type 1s who don't have any insulin secretion. Here, they don't have insulin secretion, but that can be corrected by giving the tablet. So as long as they take the tablet, they are fine. We have had, historically in other countries, 30, 40 years they've been taken. Ivana Das is probably 10 years now. She's my longest I have. But abroad, there are people after 30, 40 years still on tablets. They've not needed insulin. So lifelong, you can respond to that genetic defect being corrected by that. And it's so simple, so cheap to do.
Sairam sir, what about the fasting and Ayurvedic medicines regarding this diabetic treatment?
Intermittent fasting.
Intermittent fasting.
So this is another thing which people talk about, intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is of different types. You can fast for 6 hours, 8 hours, and then eat, have long period. It's called time-restricted eating, or TRE. Or there are others who follow alternate day fasting. So one day they'll eat whatever they want, next day they'll fast completely. Different types of intermittent fasting is there. In general, if you fast a little more, it's good for you, because we all overeat. Oh, it's 1 o'clock, so it's lunchtime, so we have to eat. Man was not designed that way. In the good old days, he ran after some animal, caught it, and we caught that animal, he ate it. Or if he had some food, he ate it. Or he found some berries in the forest, he ate it. Otherwise, he went without food. So that is how man was. Today, we have got surplus of everything. So we are overeating. In that sense, giving a little gap, intermittent, till you feel really hungry, you should not eat. All of us should not eat until you're really hungry. And then also don't overeat. That's the principle. Having said that, this intermittent fasting is now blown out of proportion. So they think it's a panacea for everything. So what they do is, morning they'll have a huge meal. And then nothing in the afternoon. They all the time feeling, oh, I'm starving, I'm not eating. And then the night they go and eat so much more. That is not going to work. Unless there is calorie restriction. Totally in 24 hours, if you're taking 1,600 calorie, now you brought it down to 1,000 calorie or 1,200 calorie, then it will work. Intermittent fasting will work. If you're going to take the same 1,600 calorie or a little more, and then say you're fasting, it's not going to help you. Metabolically, it's not going to, only psychologically it will help you. Secondly, it's difficult to keep it up. You go for travel, you go to parties, you go here, you go there, you have so many, I'm fasting. It's for short periods, it's fine. So sustainability is a problem. There are others, I've tried it, it produces gastritis for me. Severe gastritis it will produce the moment I start fasting. So better to have small, frequent feeds, but there is no one size fits all. So if fasting helps you, yeah, do it. Nothing wrong, but remember, reduce the calories. Without reducing calories, it doesn't work.
Any questions from women's campus? They're from back.
Yeah, they're all very quiet.
Sairam sir, thank you for the insightful session. I'm having 3 things. So first one is related to the session but out of the context. One of your LinkedIn posts says that if we avoid sugar for the first 1,000 days of the birth, we can avoid the incident of diabetes in our life. So is it something related to the insulin resistance that you had mentioned genetically in Indian population?
Yeah, the question, we'll take it one by one. So the question is, by avoiding sugar, can you avoid diabetes and can you avoid insulin resistance? Partly true, because if your beta cell is about to fail, and then we saw how rapidly the beta cell function goes down. So if you're on the threshold, pre-diabetic, about to, it's the last straw on the camel's back, as they say. So now you take sugar also, a lot of sugar, you'll take out all the insulin from your body. But suppose you don't have the gene at all. You're not destined to get diabetes at all. Just by eating sugar, you will not get diabetes. There are many people who can take sugar all their life and nothing happens to them. In general, sugar is not a good thing because we don't really need sugar. Do you know that salt itself is only a few hundred years old? Salt came into human history only for preserving food when food was shipped in ships. So brine, salt water, if they keep it in that, the food was stayed for longer. That is how the salt concept came. Till then, it was not known. Sugar is even more recent. So all the years humanity has gone through, they didn't live on sugar. So we really don't need sugar. So if you take sugar, take it sparingly or not at all. If you cut out sugar, nothing will happen to you. You won't die because you cut out sugar, okay? So the less sugar you take, the better. But it is not true that just by avoiding sugar, you can avoid diabetes. If your genes are very strong, you may still get it even if you avoid sugar. But in general, if you can avoid sugar, caries of the tooth and insulin resistance and obesity, it adds calories, and it's like empty calories. It doesn't really have a lot of nutrition. Instead of that, if you took nutritious food, it is much more nutritious from the nutrition point of view.
Yes, the second thing is I was actually looking for the Diana tool that you had mentioned in the slide, but you skipped it. So.
Okay, I skipped it in the interest of time. Diana tool is something which we developed in-house. It is an app which we developed in-house, and all we have to do is put in the name, age, weight, HbA1c, family history. That's all. You just put that in, and the Diana tool will immediately tell you, in 1 second, it will tell you which type of diabetes you have. Now, it was mentioned that we have 50 centers. Now, all those doctors in 50 centers may not know SID and IROD and CARDD and MARD, all these types. So in our electronic records, all they have to do is fill in these characters, which anyway will get filled in, and the tool will then tell you that this is a SID patient. Maybe you should try a secretagogue. Maybe a sulfonylurea or low dose or a DPP4 inhibitor will work for you. If it's a IROD, the obese resistant type, it will say metformin is maybe a better drug for you, SGLT2 is probably a better drug for you, or the GLP-1 like your Wegovy or Mounjaro is a better drug for you. It will give you choices. You don't have to follow it, but it's just telling the doctor that this is probably some help. If you want, we'll give you that. So these are tools which we have developed it in-house, which we are again giving it out free to people. And using that, you can classify your diet. Otherwise, everybody is treated the same. Everybody gets metformin. That's the only treatment for type 2 diabetes. That's wrong. That's not, it doesn't work that way. So now we know so much more of precision medicine. These tools are meant to help people to do that. Last question, or we can stop. Yes, ma'am, last question.
Can you tell something about jackfruit powder 365 and how does it work?
James Joseph, okay, jackfruit. So this is a guy from Kerala who has, of course, that video has gone very viral, and the reason it went viral because he got into this Man Ki Baat program with the Prime Minister. That 2 minutes of fame really took his product to great heights. He bluffs a lot in that video, by the way. So he says it's a cure for diabetes, this is for diabetes, that is for diabetes. All he's saying is cut the rice and take jackfruit, raw jackfruit powder, which doesn't, jackfruit as a fruit is very sweet, as you know, but this is jackfruit powder. So what he's saying, reduce the rice and replace it with something else. It makes sense to some extent that you can do that. But all the claims which have been made, he says nature has published something and something has done something, those studies are very weak. I've seen them. And somewhere along the line, somebody asked me like this and I said something. So now he quotes me also. He said, even Dr. Mohan has approved it, he says. So he goes on like that. They're all marketing stunts. So yes, if you can, you don't need to use jackfruit powder and all these things you don't have to do. Just reduce your rice and take more vegetables. That's enough. That's much simpler, cheaper. You don't have to buy a product. We don't know how it's processed. We don't know any of that. So you don't need to do anything artificial.
Sairam sir, this is regarding ensuring beta cell secretion efficiency. What are the methods you suggest?
So first of all, if you have obesity, you're putting a big strain on the pancreas. You're trying to pull out more insulin. So when you reduce weight, the need is less. It's like a truck. If you put a truck full of load, the pressure on the suspension and the tire and everything is more. You just offload the pressure and the truck can run. Similarly, the pancreas, you overload it with too much of calories, too much of carbs, too much of weight, too much of fat, then the pancreas is overloaded. The moment you reduce it, it improves. So that is one way. Second thing is to use the right medicines for the right patient. If you use it in the right way, then those beta cells can be preserved. But the problem is that with age, the beta cells go down. That is why the age-related diabetes comes. So to some extent, we have not found this magic drug to increase beta cell function. If beta cell functions are destined to go down because of genes, there's very little we can do about it. You can prolong it. You can, instead of getting diabetes at, say, 30, if you get it at 40 or 50, that's good, because then it takes another 20 years to develop complications. So that way you can do it, but we don't have a magic bullet to increase the beta cell function.
Saram sir, apologies, you said it's the last question, but just one more question over here. It's about the chronic stress over here.
Stress.
Yeah, chronic stress.
Yeah.
So, did you happen to study the chronic stress level as well? Because if we look at the wide range of young adults or middle-aged people, they get diabetics mainly stress. Some of the studies says that. So, based on that, what's your take? And how do we control it? Because like we have this term like stress eaters, and we often get into carbs mainly because of like to reduce the stress level. So what's your take on that?
I got it. So question is, does stress produce diabetes? Yes, of course it does. So stress-induced diabetes, when you have stress, the counter-regulatory hormones, your cortisol, your growth hormone, adrenaline, noradrenaline, these are all the cortisol, these are all the counter-regulatory hormones. They all oppose insulin. So if insulin is only hormone to reduce the glucose, all these hormones can increase the glucose. So they'll go and attack the insulin and make it less effective. So every time you're stressed, all these hormones will increase, and therefore your insulin. A classic example was COVID. So during COVID, due to the fear itself, people are developing diabetes. Second thing, during COVID, they gave steroids. Steroid is nothing but cortisol, which is again a counter-regulatory. That produced diabetes. I can give you a story if you like, a short story. So I had a Anglo-Indian lady who came to me many years ago, and I still remember her because her blood sugar was some 780 or something when she walked in with 2 bottles of water in her hand. She couldn't even carry it. So I said, why are you carrying 2 bottles? One should be enough. No, I'm so thirsty, she said. She had 780 milligram blood sugar. I admitted her, I couldn't control her. I tried insulin, tablets, everything. But she was okay. So I sent her home. A month later, she came back. Sugars had started dropping. Slowly, I withdrew the insulin. Then I withdrew the tablets also. Then she was on nothing. And she said, I'm eating 8 chocolates a day. And my sugar is 80, Then I said, there's something wrong. The same lady I've seen, 700 and something, I couldn't control her, insulin, tablets. Now she's eating 8 chocolates, her blood sugar is 80. What happened? Tell me, something I'm missing somewhere. She said, no, doctor, my husband is having an affair with another lady. I couldn't sleep, Then only it struck me that such things can produce diabetes. I would never have imagined that such things can produce. I only talked, did you eat something, So, then I said, no, what happened now? Now your diabetes is gone. Oh, she got transferred to Calcutta. With that, he came back to me. It's a true story. It's a true story, So that opened my mind. And I said, when you're a physician, you should think of so many other factors, not just whether they're eating halwa or eating something. There are so many other factors. And the amount of rise of sugar is not a small amount, 700. So, can stress produce diabetes? Yes. But is that the commonest cause of diabetes? No. But you should think of it. When somebody's sugars are extremely high, you just ask them, are you having some stress? They may not tell you. But when you ask them, then they will come out with it. So definitely, and one of the good things is, by doing pranayama, yoga, by doing the things which we learn here, you can bring those kinds of diabetes down. In fact, all types of diabetes can improve if you do all that. So stress definitely is one of the causes. And for blood pressure as well. I think we'll stop here. We've gone beyond the time.
I'm sure there are many more questions. Yes, after listening.
I am happy, but yes, I don't want to hold all of them.
For want of time, we will close now. And I'm sure you can definitely connect to Sir and get many more questions answered. The way Sir showed us the app, and also we can log into that. And I'm sure if you take statistics, at least 20 to 30% of the people here can be diabetic or pre-diabetic or potentially...
I don't want to ask that question, but I'm sure if my stats is correct, that's correct.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Dear sir, I stand here with very few words because you triggered us intellectually so much, and you kept us thinking, and this indeed was a food for thought that you gave us today. Distinguished sir, what you have done today with your erudite talk, presenting the findings of your extremely impactful research studies, is to demonstrate at one level how, as a dutiful son to a proud father, took up a hypothetical statement made by your father seriously, as Rama did by Pitruvakya Paripalana, and dwell upon it to define your life's efforts to understand the gravity of the statement and go beyond to make many more path-breaking discoveries and inspire future generations as well. At another level, you ignited young minds and inspired them as to how one has to ask a socially relevant research question and go end to end, sparing no stone unturned in answering the question through rigorous experimental work, far-reaching collaborations, and tenacious efforts with single-pointed intention to serve the society. Yet another exemplification of Pitruvakya Paripalana, where you stood by the word of your spiritual father, Bhagavan Sri Sathya Sai Baba, and took and defined your life to serve the society. Where, when Swami always says, science should serve the society, and you is a standing example for that, sir. Thank you for being here and sparing your valuable time and sharing your lifelong research work and summarizing in such simple terms in such a unimaginable way. During the sacred ongoing Atirudra Mahayagnam, which is offering us food for our spirit, through your timely talk, you gave us food for our thought and made us reflect on how we have to tune our approach towards this silent killer epidemic, diabetes, and keep ourselves safe and secure by modifying our lifestyles, and also whoever is relevant, at least, can put in efforts to nullify this epidemic. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again for being with us and giving us such wonderful food for thought. Now, I request our revered Chancellor, sir, Sri Chakravarti Garu, to come on to the stage. Yes, sir, you can be here, sir. Yes. Now I request our revered Chancellor, sir, to felicitate Padma Shri Dr. V. Mohan. Now I request Chancellor, sir, to hand over the citation. Now I request our Vice Chancellor, sir, to hand over our token of love to Dr. V. Mohan, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your presence. Now, we will close the proceedings by offering Mangalarati to our Bhagwan. I request Dr. Mohan, sir, to come forward and offer the Arati. प्राणपते आश्रितकल्पलतिका आश्रितकल्पलतिका आपद्बान्धवा ॐ जय जगदीश हरे मातपिता गुरुदैवमु मरि अन्तयु नीवे स्वामी मरि अन्तयु नीवे नाद ब्रह्म जगन्नाथ नाद ब्रह्म जगन्नाथ नागेन्द्राशयन ॐ जय जगदीश हरे ओंकार रूपवुज श्रीमत्साई महादेवा सत्य साई महादेवा मंगलारति अंदुको मंगलारति अंदुको मंधर गिरिधारी ओम जय जगदीश हरे नारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण नारायण ओम नारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण ओम नारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा नारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण नारायण ओम नारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा नारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण नारायण ओम नारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण ओम सत्यनारायण नारायण ओम जय सद्गुरुदेवा ओम शांति 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 समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु समस्तलोकाः सुखिनो भवन्तु Samastalokaah Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Jai Bolo Bhagwan Shri Sathya Sai Baba Ji ki. I request all the students to be kindly seated. We will wait for the dignitaries to exit the hall. Then, in the order, we request the women's campus to leave the hall. And I request all the men's students to be seated for 5 minutes until the women campus students leave the hall. Thank you.